University. Opening opposition, we have BRAC. In closing government, we have North South University. And in closing opposition, we have the second team from BRAC. So the motion for the grand final is this house supports the armament of women. Yeah, and we are hoping to see a great final. So as soon as we get the go ahead, we'll start. But do help us out by making sure we are silent and not making any noise that disrupts the debate. Thank you. Wireless mic is no, chair the wireless mic. Right, so we'll be starting the finals now. So everyone do keep your phones on silent and keep your voices to a minimum. Judging the final, we'll have Kazi from IBA, Zobayer from AUW and Faisal from University. So without any further ado, can we have the Prime Minister to start the debate for the House? Thank you.
এটা ফোন কার ও আচ্ছা so that got recorded as well. Hello ঠিক আছে okay hello who's keeping time? Okay, starting in 3, 2, 1. So basically, what is this debate about? This debate has two fundamental questions. A, is it principally justified that women can bear arms? And two, in which world women are more likely to influence societal, political and economic change, and in which world they are more likely to have a secured lifestyle? Before we move on to our before we move on to our impacts and other arguments, a bit of principle. Our first question in this debate is that when do we give individuals the right to bear arms? Generally, when these individuals, general argument is that these individuals have a right to self-defense. When does individuals have a right to self-defense? When individuals have a history of being oppressed and attacked, when individuals are vulnerable for not having enough control on the power structures or enough physical strength per se, to mitigate that imbalance or disproportionate allocation of power, we allow them to bear arms so that they can defend themselves for the odds, since the odds are stacked against those individuals. Furthermore, when a state has historically failed to uphold its social contract with individuals, that they are going to ensure equal participation of these individuals, they are going to ensure equal protection to these individuals, that is also another scenario where you allow these individuals to bear arms to curb that vulnerability so that these individuals can, you can mitigate the gap and you can ensure that these individuals can participate in a level playing field. We believe that we live in a world quite similar to these oppressed individuals where women for centuries have gone through mistreatment, subjugation and systematic disenfranchisement. Even in the 21st century, which the opposition is probably going to talk about, a lot of systemic change took place, a lot of movements have been brought about, women got voting rights and whatnot, we have the feminist movement and whatnot. Despite all of these movements, women are still being raped in the worst case and catcalled in the best case. Even when these women can actually pursue change, prosecute individuals, the system and the means of productions are still controlled by the patriarchal institutions. For instance, regardless of Brett Kavanaugh raping a particular individual 40 years ago, that particular individual still got supported by an establishment that is capitalist and patriarchal, since they go hand in hand, and that particular individual got appointed as a Supreme Court judge, right? So basically, no matter what form of change they talk about, those changes are not real, superficial at the best scenario. When they move for change, they're oftentimes not taken seriously by people say that identity politics is not important, and oftentimes they're called snowflakes or social justice warriors in a demeaning sense, not in a positive sense. So systemic barriers keep existing, no matter what you try, and still will keep existing unless such oppressive institutions and predominantly patriarchal social structure is not challenged by a brute force, ladies and gentlemen. We believe that brute force is allowing women to bear arms, and we're proud to propose that. So we believe in principles these women have the right to defend themselves, and as a result of which we should allow them to do so. Moving on to our model before we move on to our impact. Our model basically have four principles, four ideas. A, women who do not have a history of mental illness gets to bear arms. B, arms do not include assault rifles or semi-automatic guns. They generally conceivable pistols or revolvers. Thirdly, they will undergo similar criminal justice system principles unless used for self-defense purposes. And four, additional training for safety. So what are the impacts of this? We're basically going to talk about 6 things throughout our debate. A, deterrence, how it ensures deterrence. B, how it empowers women, like literally. And C, how it shifts the power dynamics within the family sphere and within the social structure. 4, it's going to break stereotype. 5, it's going to ensure increased economic participation, which is financially going to empower the women. And 6, how it becomes easier to influence the policies in favor of women. So basically, how does the deterrence work in this world? In this world, compared to their world, what happens is that anyone, basically, this is common sense, right? Anyone would be much more afraid of assaulting women or catcalling women or harassing a particular woman in any way, because now they're afraid that this individual might contain an arm. This individual might have a conceivable gun within her purse. So that's scenario A, where individuals are not only deterred by the system, which they are basically not, because if that was the actual case, probably the rate of rape would have dropped, which it did not. So that means the deterrence in our world is probably better, because it's active deterrence and direct deterrence. That particular individual is afraid of harassing another individual in direct personal confrontation, which is more effective in the real scenario. Secondly, men generally catcall women or sexually harass women because they implicitly consider women to be soft, passive, and they think that, oh, she won't mind. What's she gonna do even if she minds? So basically, now these men cannot keep thinking that particular thing. Why? Because now she can pull a gun and challenge that particular individual by saying, I dare you to say that again. If you have the courage, please say that again. Probably in our world, that likelihood is higher that individual women in that particular microaggression scenario are more empowered. Thirdly, as we talked about how it shifts the power dynamics in favor of women, ladies and gentlemen. Look, how it translates in case of empowerment is a very important argument here. For men, or for us, probably for us guys, probably getting out of home at late at night or at 10, returning home at 10 is probably not a big issue. It's basically like breathing air, right? But probably for a woman, being able to get out of home at 10, going out with friends, getting back at home at 10 is something that is humongous, that is so important. In our world, generally, in their world, generally women are not allowed to go out or not return home after 10, because their parents are rightfully worried that probably their girls are not secured outside. Probably they will be harassed. Probably something bad will happen to them. That fear is legit, ladies and gentlemen. That fear keeps existing in their world. But in our world, what happens is that particular individual now gets to go out, because now that particular individual has that weapon, that particular instrument to defend herself against all odds, ladies and gentlemen. Probably it's not going to solve all of the problem, but compared to their world, our world has a much better solution. Furthermore, when that happens, not only that women want to go out because they want to go to clubs or they want to go out with friends. No, generally women also make compromises in their world, in their career choices. How? Generally they take a job which probably only, following which they can get home within 6 or 7 or 8. Probably they have to take Uber, they have to take more expensive choices of transportation so that they can 7 minutes, okay, so they can get back home. In our world, what happens is that particular individual now she has now more flexibility to participate in the economy and be more financially empowered. More is going to be explained by Megha. Thank you everyone, we're proud to propose.
Right, then to the Prime Minister, now let's invite.
আচ্ছা আমি এটা কেন নিয়ে যাচ্ছি?
I think you left your phone.
No, that's not my phone, that's recording.
Oops. We think women have been structurally oppressed for a very long time. The reason why any strides have happened is because of the nature of the way the women have protested throughout the years. It's literally because we have been able to do rational discourse, because we've been able to pressurize people in power to give women more support structures. It's literally not because we went up in arms and we literally told them we're a threat and we might end your life if you don't do this for us. We don't think that's necessarily a very strategic way for you to further rights for women, but we be more specific about it in our constructives. Firstly, a few rebuttals. We think for example, if they tell you that this is because women are raped in the workplace, we think self-defense is extremely different, because you don't necessarily need to arm all women, and all women don't necessarily need to go into armament in order to defend themselves. But secondly, we don't think we're necessarily against self-defense to begin with, because you can still defend yourself by things like taekwondo, right? You don't necessarily arm yourself for it. But secondly, it's also we think legal laws are there to protect women against sexual assault. Things like the fact that you condemn rape, or things like the Me Too movement that they really shame men who actually do these things are still existing in our world, right? The traction for this is however compromised when you sort of destroy the goodwill that women have generated throughout the years when you allow this to happen. But also we think that it's also important that if you want norms men catcalling women or women staying out late to stop, you need to ensure that people listen to them. And the best way for you to do that is not to destroy the goodwill that women have generated throughout the generations, right? It's not to make it seem like there are a very violent force who's out there to harm you, who is a literal threat to your existence. Because even if, let's say, they comply with the rules of CGS, you still know they likely have a weapon with them. You still know they can still end your life at any point in time. This threat is still activated in human psychology, and we think that's exactly the image that people have processed whenever they encounter these women, and we don't think this erases in their world. But also, we think that even if they want more systems to be held accountable, with Brett Kavanaugh, you still need more support structures to hold them accountable. We think if you want politicians like Donald Trump to be accounted for, you need women everywhere to unite, and you also need allies men to actually come in and hold them accountable for that. We think that when it probably seems that they're going to strike any moment and threaten your life, they no longer seem like an ally that you want to make, because they seem like a very dangerous force who might literally go into violence, because most people aren't really supportive of that act to begin with. And we think that itself is extremely problematic if you want to further any women's rights or if you especially want to change conservative norms in these societies. But moving on to the first constructive, we think that when direct image is that like these women will cause destruction. They're likely going to be very threatening to your children. They're likely going to end your life at any point because they might act on emotional force to defend themselves. But also, we think that because of that, people can easily justify brutality against them as well. And that is exactly why like things like structural barriers that literally grip women down and like are used to make sure they do not rise into powerful positions in society are going to be much stronger, because men literally think that they're a direct threat towards their own existence, and they actually think that it's actually better if you don't provide them with like more opportunities, because you know that they like literally might threaten your life at any point. So any like forced pressure that they exert is literally countered as a justification by your oppressor, because now your oppressor can literally say and believe that there's a reason behind why I want you to not have that degree of power. There's a reason behind why you do not deserve that economic capital, because you're literally going to threaten my life with it, and I do not trust you with that. We think that that itself means that women are still likely to have less allies, making it more difficult for them to further any progress. But also, we think that secondly, it creates a lot of factions amongst women, because not all women are into these violent protests to begin with, but this image that all women are into armament is still existing, making it extremely difficult for like all these women to like sort of like change the norms in these societies. How so? We think the norm in these kind of societies is that there's like a lot of these men in power are patriarchal and are extremely controlling. Like they literally have more say in like these societies more than anyone else, right? We think that therefore it's much more easier for them to like literally crack down on these women who are likely to be seen as a threat, make it more easier for them to deny them with opportunities like economic or educational opportunities that might actually help them further rise. The problem is, because this image seems like it's representative of all women to begin with, it seems like all women themselves are likely to be very violent and dangerous, and all women do not deserve to have that same degree of economic empowerment that they're fighting for. We think that therefore you're literally making sure that the women who are the most vulnerable in these societies remain the most worst off, even in the long run, because you're still allowing them to consent towards something that is representative of all women to begin with. But also, we think that like lastly, if you especially like want to change these norms to begin with, you need to ensure that some degree of negotiation or discourse happens in your world, right? Currently, it's important, right? And so we sort of engage with our context. We think that a lot of traction has been generated so far because like people like Judith Butler, people like Malala still exist who are feminist icons who do not really resort to violence to like sort of like promote their message, right? We think because of that, the traction exists in media to sort of talk about women's issues on a day-to-day basis. And we think that because of that, more women are more compliant towards these things. But also, because we still need these women, we like need these men who are in very powerful positions and control the narrative and control the institutions of power in these especially like underprivileged areas which is women live in. It's more important that you not literally make them like locked into these cycles where they are unable to like completely oppose these systems, right? Because we don't think necessarily like having like a generational violence is necessarily the best way for you to ensure some bit of peace and prosperity for these women who are the most vulnerable. Sure.
Thank you. So what's your alternative to the problem that exists within patriarchal societies?
Yeah, sure, we were going into that. We think rational discourse and constructivism has worked. Me Too movement is literally a peaceful protest, right? Has been extremely effective in ensuring that men are actively condemned for the things they do. That's exactly why Harvey Weinstein was prosecuted 2 days ago, right? We think that's exactly why oppressors are still held accountable. That's why like you have like new laws and like equity laws in like corporations, because you understand this is an important issue and women haven't even to lobby for it properly. The moment you ensure that like there aren't properly is the moment people think that they're a threat to my existence, and therefore you ensure that even moderates who are likely to opt into support for women's rights are less likely to are more likely to be swayed away because they themselves feel they're very extremely violent for it. This is exactly why people do not support like guerrilla feminism, right? Because they think it's a very violent way of dealing and promoting and furthering your rights. But lastly, we think discourse is extremely important. It has been like sort of like raised up like after a very long time. We think discourse is always tainted in their world because people and media especially focus significantly on the violent actions committed by these acts, by the armament of women. They focus on the backlash generated from it, but rather they sort of like sway away and like give less traction towards more important feminist issues. Things like the fact of like labor laws that women go through on a daily basis, the protection, the lack like Planned Parenthood and lack of abortion rights. These are always denied because people always think that women have caused extremely a lot of violence and they do not deserve the same degree of media traction. We think this itself becomes a lot worse under their world, and even the rights we've garnered throughout the ages don't get further in their world. We're very proud to oppose. Yeah.
opening opposition case was basically a fine-tuned way of saying that appeasing the establishment and appeasing patriarchy is the only way that women have got things done this far, and that should be the way the future feminist movement works. These ideas of rational discourse with men, as if it's irrationality that is driving the violence against women, not the discrepancy in power and agency that has been prevalent all throughout history. Understand, this does not really fit in with the history of feminism that they claim to be on the side of. What is a connecting thread of all sorts of feminist activities that has earned women's rights? Sometimes they have been violent, sometimes they have been non-violent or through civil disobedience. But in all cases, the common thread is they have fought for something that gives them more agency in society. This is things like voting rights, which makes sure that you have more agency within the political system. This is rights like getting into public or private spaces like temples or other places where you do not have the right to go, essentially meaning you have more agencies. What the opening government will show you is how our motion or our proposal is the only proposal that exclusively increases the agency of those women, that does not happen under any other world or any other kind of an issue. So understand there, so basically what Aliya is alluding to is a very sophisticated way of saying, oh, there's going to be backlash. But understand that case is negated by history itself. If we were thinking about what backlash would have been and how severe backlash was in the in the 15th or 16th or even 17th century, where women even practicing things like astronomy and other things were seen as witchcraft, and when people were burned to death because they were thought as seeing something as radical and extreme. When the suffragettes started their movement, it was also seen as something that is extreme. So patriarchy is going to think of things as extremes in any situation that happens. So the idea that there will be a lot of backlash is simply not good enough to win the debate. Another argument that comes from them is the idea that women will be viewed as extremely violent. We don't necessarily think that's going to be true, because we have been indoctrinated and we have a historical perception of women being very soft and very naive to begin with. What this model does is that starts questioning that. So the idea that suddenly you will see people thinking of women as this extremely violent sort of people, violent part of the population who are only going to commit violence is not true. But even if we take them at their best case scenario and think that women are going to be seen as very violent, we're going to show you why that's still a marginal improvement under our side of the world. So what do we give you in this debate? We ask you three fundamental questions. A, which creates more agency for women? Which creates more deterrence for potential oppressors? And in which world does the narrative and power dynamic shift in a way that is helpful or positive for those women? First, into the agency argument. Understand this. All other forms of solutions, by the way, solutions that they do not show, and that simply means they are okay with the status quo, which should not be, any team stand in this debate. Understand that any sort of other sort of solutions that you can offer, things like having CCTV cameras all over the city, like Delhi has done, in order to stop or prevent rape, or creating a sort of a policing system that polices certain areas more in order, in essence, to ensure that there is less violence, or creating laws that make sure that people who get convicted of rape have more time in jail or have more sentences. All of these things doesn't necessarily give more agency to women. It simply ensures that the same patriarchal structure, whose patriarchal structures are empowered through the means of giving women more empowerment. This is to say, when you give police more right to surveil or add more police to a certain area, this essentially means that police, who are oftentimes the biggest perpetrators of this violence, are more likely to be seen as impune. They're going to have more impunity, they're going to have more power. Essentially meaning, these are going to be the same institutions that are going to push down women even more and create even more violence. So the political capital you waste in order to get more police into those areas essentially harms you and doesn't necessarily give you agency. If you tell the government to have more surveillance, if you tell the government to do more surveillance, put CCTV cameras everywhere, that essentially means the government has now more capacity or capability to surveil more. Essentially not increasing the agency of women, essentially just increasing the patriarchal structure of the government, which has been part of the system that has oppressed women forever. So in our world, that is the only way you create more agency for that woman. We do not really want them to be more confident of the government. We do not really want them to to be more confident of the police. We want them to be more confident of themselves. And that is what we provide in this debate. We tell you how in our world these women are more confident about themselves. If they are more confident about themselves, they are going to take decisions that will ultimately help them in a lot of ways. For example, taking jobs that does not have night shifts is something that is happening in the status quo, because women do not feel like going outside at night because they feel insecure. That changes. They do not think like they can face up to someone who's catcalling them, because they don't have an agency to ensure that he doesn't do that again. It essentially means women now have more control and more agency than any other alternative they can propose. Secondarily, which creates more deterrence. Understand, all women do not even necessarily need to carry gun, but the idea in the head of a molester or potential molester that someone may have a conceived a hidden gun in her pocket, makes sure that she thinks twice or three times before even calling her. Now, why is that different from creating more deterrence in terms of creating more jail sentences or things of that sort? Because understand that the idea that you may be injured or killed is something that is more direct than having an idea of, you maybe can get caught in the legal system, which is unlikely in the first place, and then you can go into the legal system and you then get punished and get sentenced. Moreover, understand, this is something that is very important. In law, we often think the predisposition is someone is innocent until proven guilty. So in a situation where a man rapes and then he has to go through the court procedure, the law is in his favor, because you have to prove him guilty until that he's proven innocent. If we reverse the thing, and even in the worst case scenario where women are seen as someone who has killed a man because of those things, that sort of benefit of the doubt now goes to that individual, that woman, because now she's the one that you have to prove that she is guilty until she is innocent, until you can prove her guilty. This essentially changes the burden in a way that creates more deterrence on those individuals. And to finish it off, understand that women have been seen as unempowered people who cannot really do anything. Well, even if we bite the bullet and say they will be seen as someone more violent, well, we do not really mess with violent people. We do not really go and rape them. We are ready to bite the bullet. We are ready to give them more agency and create more deterrence. Very proud to propose.
Next, Deputy Prime Minister, Deputy Leader of the Opposition. Here.
Alright. Hi. Am I audible? Yeah, cool. Alright. Starting in 3, 2, 1. The reason that guerrilla feminism is perceived to be a bad idea is because the perception that all women are violent is an extremely harmful perception to perpetuate in society, when in reality, all women are not going to opt into actually arming themselves, because a lot of the times maybe they won't have access to arms, or maybe they just wouldn't consciously opt in because they don't want to be violent and they don't want to seem as that, right? So, why do we essentially win this debate? A couple of things in my speech. First, let's talk about what patriarchy actually is. Patriarchy is not a person. We don't think that you are arming yourself against a person. You are arming yourself, the fight against patriarchy is a fight against a system that has existed for thousands of years. Patriarchy comes in extremely subtle forms. It's not always just about men attacking you. Sometimes it is about you not having equal wages. Sometimes it is about you being shamed for having multiple sexual partners. Sometimes it is because your religion tells you that you don't deserve equal inheritance rights. Patriarchy is an accumulation of many different belief systems that accumulate together and form a system that just happens to be oppressive towards women. Your fight as a woman is against the system. By arming yourself against specific people who are agents of that system won't help you topple the system to begin with. Your fight as a woman has to be to change the way that these institutions work so that you can get the rights that you deserve. We don't think this happens under our world. Why? Because you threatening one religious leader with a gun won't stop the fact that women have less inheritance laws or that marital rape is not accepted in religion. You pointing a gun to your boss won't change the fact that in the most rural areas, women are still not allowed to work and they're still not allowed to hold down a 9-to-5 job. And this is severely problematic because the fight against patriarchy is all encompassing and it affects women from all different walks of life. So we don't think that this is an effective system. But moving on more about that. No, thank you. Right, like moving on more about this, right? We think that the best you can do here is like why has progress actually happened previously? Which is what Aliya has talked to you about, right? The reason progress has been able to happen is because women have been galvanized together and like opposed like specific parts of institutions that oppress them. When women got all women got together and exposed some specific laws or like beliefs and practices that were perpetuated for years and opposed those beliefs and practices with rational logic behind why those practices were problematic to begin with. That is when people are forced to listen to you, when you actually have merit behind what you are saying. Saying allow women to work because they're 50% of your population and they will contribute to the economy. Allow women to work because they're individuals who have their own identity, who deserve the right to access things like financial independence. These are essentially things that allowed like progress to have happened in the first place. And we think that the reason progress is still continuing to happen is because women are actually tackling this problem head on and like facing it with things like logic. What do I mean by this? Things like women being in positions of power, powerful women becoming the voice of all those voiceless women and actually advocating for these women is something that is creating massive change in society. So, right. So secondly, let's talk about this idea, right? We think all women are unlikely to opt into this. Maybe because they don't have access to a lot of weapons, or maybe just because they don't want to be perceived as violent. This is important, and this is important. Why? Because despite the fact that all women are not arming themselves, the perception that all women are violent still exists, which means that the worst of people in society are going to be women who already live in the worst economic conditions, who live in the poorest areas where it's literally controlled by religious men, or literally have like rural law systems that don't need to encompass women, that don't have quota systems, things like this. And those men now have a justification behind locking up their wives and locking up their daughters, because the perception from mainstream society is the fact that all women are violent. And we think that this is severely problematic, because you have to penetrate into these societies to overturn those practices. And the only way you can penetrate into these societies is literally by logically talking about your problems. But if not, you still need powerful allies who can still talk to these men about the problems. And that is why Aliya's entire analysis of befriending the establishment is important, because the truth is, you still live in a patriarchal society, and that is not changing anytime soon. And you cannot simultaneously coexist in a patriarchal society and expect that the patriarchal society will be amazing and grant you all your rights if you're openly carrying out guns and like openly like being violent, or at least having the perception that you're going to be violent. We don't think that you can have any change if that is how it goes. Before moving on, yes.
Okay, even in the status the patriarchal institutions identify the feminist movement or members of the feminist movement as extreme and radical. So basically, like, what is the comparative that you're defending that is so significant that we should not take the trade-off of empowering women with weapons?
We don't necessarily think that all women are seen as extreme or like radical under current status quo. We think that women, by being rational, by galvanizing, and because the feminist movement has progressed so far, they've made incredibly powerful friends within the societies. So there are powerful allies that speak up for feminists. Right? There are celebrities and there are powerful men that actually speak up for these women and stand up for their rights. Why Why has that happened so far? It's because they are convinced of the fact that women are oppressed. We think that this progress that you've made so far backfires the minute you put on the tag that all these women are armed and they are all violent. Why is that so? Because it literally justifies retaliation from the power structures, right? It justifies retaliation of individuals who can just like hit women because they think that, oh, I thought that she was armed, which is literally something that happens in society. And we think these are problematic stereotypes to go in, like, to perpetuate. But even more than that, we think that you actually stop progress because you, like, alienate potential people or alienate potential allies that you could have had who would have opted into the feminist narrative or who would have opted into the women's rights narratives, because now the feminist narrative has literally become a caricature of what people like always made fun of it for being, like, oh, all women hate men. That is literally what people think the feminist movement is. And once you allow all women to be armed, that stereotype of the feminist movement gets justified because that is what it is perceived as. That because all women hate men, now they have literally armed themselves in order to like kill these men. This is why gun control is important, right? Because we just don't want every single individual to be out there killing or at least having the perception or causing societal chaos, because it creates a cycle of violence when you just give out guns and assume that like something good is going to happen or that everyone is going to use it like cautiously. We don't think that happens. That is why we protest against things like giving like the right to bear arms. We think that that is relevant. So why do we win this debate? Because we've told you that in order to oppose a system of patriarchy, changes need to come from within. It's happening right now. Don't like destroy all the progress you've made so far. Very proud to be on the right side of this debate. Thank you.
Now technology is yellow. Now here.
Ready? 1, 2, 3. They identify patriarchy to be an accumulation of many things, and they say it's a problem of the system. And their solution to this is you rationally talking to these huge and powerful systems who have not listened to you in so many years. We think there's a problem-solution mismatch, right? Because they claim that you need powerful allies, but look at like Hillary Clinton. This woman has had the most powerful allies in the political arena in terms of men, and she still could not win the election, right? Which means even if you have powerful allies, it's very difficult for women in like every single individual women to get the kinds of security that they deserve. What does this mean? This means that even if you get policies passed, those policies are restricted to certain privileged women within the society. What this means is only women like Kim Kardashian or Ellen DeGeneres are people who get to voice out their concerns and probably get changes. But that one woman who's walking down the street in the middle of the night, to her, the policies never trickle down. You pass this policy, but these are only visible because the implementation of those policies never happened. Which means all the goodwill that they have been talking about did happen, but we would say they were only restricted to people who had the ability to access these goodwills. Which means they have been talking about like the existence of criminal justice system. I agree, a lot of laws have been passed, but in order for you to access this laws, it's very difficult because you need money to make lawsuits against people, right? You need years and years, you need to fight these battles for years and years, which means justice and the way laws were created were made by men in general. Men decided what laws are going to look like, what constitution is going to look like, and then men told you in order for you to access these laws, you're going to need money, and then men did not allow you to get jobs because men thought if you went like you couldn't get higher positions in the society because you have to go home and feed the children, which means these are 4 layers as to why all the existing systems are inaccessible for women who need it the most. If they're inaccessible for women, we think for every single individual woman to feel secure in the society, this is the only way that they can feel this sense of security in general. Second, they come, they place it down. They say that, you know what, progress is coming because we see a lot of the movements. We think progress has come, but identify the nature of progress. Me Too movement happened after the women was raped. All of the things happened after the crime was committed. And this is very crucial. All the progress that you've been talking about comes at the cost of one or two women or thousands and thousands of women over years. This is very problematic because in our world, the solution deals with the crime before it's committed. The solution saves a lot of women from being faced with these scenarios in general, which means when men have the perception that you might be able to hurt them back, they don't come and like catcall you, which means the mental trauma that you have to go through, the panic that goes through your mind when you walk through the streets every night and you think, you look back every single time, if someone is sitting behind you, these things don't happen, which means we prevent the crime before it happens. There are two layers of impact to this. Number one, your physical safety, which means progress now does not come at the cost of life of women, and we think every life is equally valid. If you want to save women in general, you cannot sacrifice one or two women and say, okay, now we have progress, wow, and then make it inaccessible as well. But secondly, we think the mental trauma that every single woman has to go through in order to access the years and years of progress you've been talking about is something that you need to take into account. It's what, 2020, and you still have women who probably cannot, vote in places or access the military training and whatnot, which means every time these people are sitting in a room and they know that their boss has sexually harassed them, but they still need to be within that room, is the mental trauma they need to go through. How do we change this? Because you need to identify that the nature of sexual harassment is such that it hides under plain sight, and the only person who knows this is the perpetrator and the victim. This characterization is extremely important because the way in which criminal justice system operates, it needs proof. You need layers and layers of proof because his words against your words is very difficult for you to prove, which means the uniqueness of sexual harassment is only the victim knows what has happened to her. Only the victim knows what she went through, which means the only way you can solve this unique forms of crime is if you do this. Lastly, their contention was, this creates an image regarding women that all women are violent in general. No, sit down, and as a result of which men will not help women anymore. Number one, I do not think that men has helped women a lot, to be honest. But the men who have helped are men who probably are people who had a lot of access to knowledge, right? You cannot just say all the amount of education and liberal thoughts that have progressed in the society will just go away because women have guns. That's a very big assumption to make. I think men in general today are way more feminist because they understand from years and years of knowledge and all the social media and whatnot that they cannot just do whatever they want, which means we do not think this will roll back. But even if this does so, we think that's great because now you get to identify which women actually want justice and which don't. What does this mean? This means that the trials still happen, right? Which means you still have conversations regarding this. The same way we, like moderate Muslims, have isolated ourselves from extreme Muslims by identifying them and saying we are not a part of those community because we are not extremists. I think women can do the same. They can go out and they can say that probably one or two women are extremists, but we are not. Why is this viable, or why will this be feasible? Because when you have women carrying guns, every single action that they do are probably more visible. When these things are more visible, you get more media attention and more media exposure, which means your ability to clarify yourself as to what your stance is within the society increases. Before I move on, yes?
If these men control everything, why is it better to aggravate them and give them an incentive to retaliate against those vulnerable women who will be facing the trauma in the future?
They're aggravated already. What matters to me is my independence and my mental safety and how I feel every day. If that happens, I think we will live it. Lastly, the biggest, most important principle is regardless of all the harm that comes out, this is a fight for your independence. There is a reason when during the 1971 independence war, regardless of a lot of innocent lives being lost, we were okay with the cost of it. We were okay, and people did not think every Bangladeshi is violent because they knew it was for a noble cause. I think it's the same because women are fighting for their independence in general, and the fight for your independence against gender-based violence is something that does not create a negative impression against you, because just like when you fight wars that are against ideologies, and as they identify this is a war against ideology and system, I think it's similar when you take on arms during wars because systematic harm has been done to you. We think it's similar, and they're absolutely justified regardless of the consequences. It's a principle that is important. Even if there were consequences, since you have been harmed, you have the right to feel secure mentally, physically, and we think we most definitely will. Thank you.
Member of the opposition.
Where's the mic? Am I audible? Starting in 3, 2, 1. Opening makes a very narrow gauge about the perpetration of women and how the deterrence effect actually ensures the structural barriers of women. But they don't necessarily show a model or mechanization as to how those deterrents will automatically break down the structural barriers that have been going on for ages in the first place. They tell us that they show us different examples of deterrence, and they tell us that these deterrences will be better placed if women were armed. But they don't necessarily tell us as to how this will create systematic abuse that has been going on for ages, and that has been going on for years and years, and how they will tackle that. And that is why opening doesn't win this debate. Secondly, the opening opposition talks about how it affects patriarchy, but they don't necessarily tell us the nuances that it might create when all women are armed. We believe that in our constructives we'll cover everything that comes from CG in the scope of the debate. First of all, our first constructive, that power always corrupts you. How does it do that? Because eventually in the history, men were more powerful than women. That is why they had access to more resources, and that is why they have significant social and political power more than men in the first place. So when you give more power to the woman, which is in some cases more significantly a violent form of power, this creates a systematic imbalance in the society in the first place. What it creates is that is the same difference between white men and black men. We believe that men have more control in the society, but the society perceives them as white men and black men have the same difference in and of itself. So when you empower women, when you power women with arms, this essentially creates the same type of difference. Secondly, we'd like to talk about the class system. It's because when the power system is there, the white women are more privileged than black women in the first place. This creates a systematic imbalance within the society, and that is why we believe that there will be no checks and balances in case of armaments of women, because white women will always be more privileged, they will have always more rights to gain a gun more than black women, and that will lead to persecution of black women more. Even in such cases, white women will have more power than black women, and this will create another strand of inequality in the actual spectrum of the society, which we do not want. So this essentially creates the most vulnerable of the vulnerable actors, that is the black woman or any transgender woman, and it creates more systematic imbalance within the society, which is not desired of this. So we have already tackled how the class system actually works in this case, in the scope of the debate, and how that actually propagates within the context that we tell you. That we tell you that it is because historically there has been a bad distribution of power, and that is why more people end up with resources, and that is why they have social and political capital in the first place. And it almost often occurs that power always corrupts you in certain cases, and because of this corruption, this will lead to more violence, systematic violence of the most vulnerable of the vulnerable, and that is what we do not simply satisfy with. But secondly, our second constructive includes that it doesn't necessarily give women a feeling of empowerment. For example, if one of our friends get into a army institution because his father was an army, it doesn't necessarily empower you. It's because you had a special privilege in the first place. But secondly, if one person gets it with his own merit or with his own brain, then it gives him more a feeling of empowerment. What I mean is that when you have the privilege of owning a gun, you don't necessarily gain the same level of empowerment when you use taser or when you kick the guts out of the man who is your perpetrator. That is, a sense of privilege will not not necessarily create the sense of privilege will not necessarily make you feel empowered. That is, you feel low because you are being more privileged in terms of arms, and you are necessarily creating a structural imbalance in the society. And that is why you know that. That is to say that when a woman is basically defending herself on her own, she feels more empowered, and this gives a good feeling within herself, which doesn't happen when you carry arms, because you are systematically believed to think that you are segregated from the society, and that is why it doesn't bring that sense of empowerment truly in any woman possible, and that is why we believe that it's harmful for the society. Our third constructive is that when this happens, now people already talk about the feminist movement in and of itself in different groups. Now what will happen? This will create microaggression against the feminist and feminist movement in and of itself. How will that? Because it will entirely pull out the purpose of the feminist movement in and of itself. Yes.
So, if your problem is white women will have more agency to get guns than black women, then simply subsidize it. You don't have a problem with the principle of it.
So basically, when you do that, what I already mentioned is that power always corrupts people. It's that white women will think that they're superior to the black woman, and that is what simply a world that we do not want to create. We believe that's pretty self-explanatory. Secondly, we were talking about microaggressions against feminists. So basically, this will pull out the entire purpose of the feminist movement. This will entirely everything that we have done to support the woman to ensure equality will fall down instantly, because people will be very enraged about the feminists within itself, and they will always blame them for themselves. And what will happen under this current scenario? People will continuously talk shit about feminism in radical groups like Fortune or different patriarchal groups that doesn't support feminism, and this will create different and they will be using fake names. They will be using severe forms of difference, and they'll plan attacks against these groups so that they don't get they don't break the severe deterrence from women in the first place. We believe that this is a very exclusionary policy that they talk about. Now, what does the CG talk about? CG talks about Hillary Clinton not winning the election. We believe that we cover it under the scope of the debate. There is not only the difference between men and women in the first place. It's also difference between power structure, because Donald Trump has more money, has more influence over the political structure through money. He invests into the campaign through money. So basically, when you talk about this is not only the power structure imbalance between men and women, but also influence of power structure between more money and more fame, and that is how it works. So basically, when you narrow down the scope of the debate to only structural imbalance between men and women, this doesn't how actually it works in the real world. We have told you how this will create class systems and more vulnerable of the vulnerable women will suffer. We have told you how it creates this doesn't make women feel empowered among themselves, and they will always have a feeling of guiltiness within them. And we believe that self-defense and other things that are going on the current status quo are very, very much desired in order to win, in order to ensure women's safety in and of itself. Thank you.
How the women member of the opposition speech. Now we'd like to call on the last member of the government dance. Forward, please. Here.
Can you hear me? Okay, rebutting CO first. So what they basically said in the first constructive is that, look, white women get more guns than black women. But understand, like,
this is something that is already happening, right? Like women are currently, like a black woman is currently dealing with two problems, right? One is being black and one is being women. If we can at least prove to you how we like take away the problem of misogyny from their lives, I think that's like I think that's fair enough for us to do. Like we don't have the burden to prove to you how we like solve all the intersectional problems in and of itself, right? But even if that happens, we still think it's better in our world because we're at least giving these black women more empowerment that they had before, right? Because understand, like for black women, lawsuits are a continuous cost for them, right? But getting a gun is probably a one-time cost, which means we're at least giving them that avenue to get a higher, to get to a higher position than they were before. Secondly, they're talking about the feasibility of the motion, right? That look, all women might not get guns, right? Like understand, this is a subwards motion, right? Which means we can tell you that we will probably provide like free providence of guns to women. We will probably provide education for these women to use those guns. We will probably provide training for these women to use these guns, etc., etc. So you cannot tell us that it's not feasible to give all those women, the thing in and of itself. Secondly, they tell you that understand the resistance against feminism will now increase. Understand this: when there was the first women police officers, there was a form of resistance, right? This resistance gradually gets normalized, right? Because understand, like at the beginning, no one will be very receptive to these policies, but like these normalizations are happening at the end of the day. We do see women police officers now. Secondly, just because a policy has a backlash doesn't mean you won't enact on that policy, because every policy has a backlash, right? Which means which ultimately means what you are saying is that we shouldn't go for any policy because that policy has a backlash. And even if they wanted to prove that point, they needed to tell you why that backlash is significantly more important than the benefits that we provide to you at the end of the day, right? Opening opposition. What they tell you is basically that look, male allies in powers of position are extremely important. Number one, we don't think. Number one, there's still a huge chunk of good men in this world, right? And just like Nayara said, that currently women do have a lot of male allies. Like I don't understand how those male allies are going to be extremely hypocritical and tell you that just because you have guns now, you have guns now, we won't give you the liberal support, right? They had to go through like a lot of education. Their ideas are a lot more liberal. They're a lot more perceptive to the changes that are happening in the current status quo, which means all those male allies won't just automatically disappear in and of itself. And secondly, women did have a lot of powerful allies before, but the policies were still restricted because of all the things that Megha said, that these policies are still very inaccessible for this woman in and of itself, because the entire criminal justice system was designed by men and was extremely misogynistic, right? Megha clearly said that these men who have more capital could get better lawyers at the end of the day. Please sit, right? And Megha also said that how the policing has failed, right? Because women literally needs to learn taekwondo or carry pepper sprays and all. At least in our world, we make it easier for them because we give them accessibility to things like guns, right? So that they have that amount of comfort. Secondly, opening opposition says that look, rational discussions are significantly better. But the problem here is that the correction mechanism is after the extreme harms are already done. Like after the rape happens, the perpetrator is probably going to be penalized. The amount of harm that you do to women in this period of time of waiting for this perpetrator to get the penalty is significantly harmful for this woman and significantly traumatic. At least we give you some absolute benefits of not facing these mental trauma and dealing with those problems, and the number of women we save by doing this policy is still significantly larger. Then what do we say? We give you the principle that they don't rebut to. We tell you that fighting patriarchy is like fighting a concept of independence, which means this is literally a war against the systematic harm that has been done to women. It does not matter what are the consequences or what are the harmful effects of this action, but this action is still justified. Just like in the independence war of 1971, how many lives were lost there was a lot of war crimes, we still did that for the greater good. Which means this fight against patriarchy is something that we're doing for the greater good. We will still take up arms against our violators, because if we don't take up arms against our violators, these violations will continue, because like everything has failed, and this imminent threat needs correction. What Megha has told you is that this principle is significantly important for you to understand, because patriarchy, sit down please, because patriarchy is a concept that we're fighting, which means this independence in and of itself, it does not matter what you get out of it, but the plight for it, the actions that you take for it, is still like principally justified for you to do so. So all the harms that they talk about, which was proven that won't happen, that look, you will lose allies, or you will lose all the progress, we don't think that matters, because at least you're taking up arms and telling them taking those arms and telling them that this is so important. Ultimately, what do we prove to you? We tell you from side closing government that it is imminent. It is an imminent threat that has a principal recognition of fighting in independence. We tell you how the correction mechanism comes after the harm is already done, and we give you a large extent of absolute benefits that no team in this house gives you. We tell you how inaccessible all other forms of actions taken against men is in the current status quo, and how none of them are helping women at the end of the day. We tell you that just because you are arming women, it does not necessarily mean that all your male allies will go away, because they still have the same liberal thoughts, and they still have all the support in and of itself. At least, even if all our tangible benefits don't come in this house today, we still think that we win for the very principal contention that they do have the right to fight their independence, and they do have the principal contention to fight for their independence. We clearly win this debate.
Right now, let me invite here.
No, we're recording.
Oh, sorry. Starting my speech in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Understand what this debate is essentially wanting from us, and what this debate is essentially about. What do you actually want when you arm this movement, and what do you actually want? What is the objective of this debate? The entire objective of this debate is provide security for this movement in all essence, not only in physical but also in psychological and in all aspects of providing and what this word security stands for. In our case, we will show to you how our side of the debate actually proves to you that we actually do provide them security, or even in the status quo, how better security is being provided other than with ousting the alternative solution that the government house proposes. But first, let us get in and immerse ourselves to the opening government's case and what they actually said throughout their debate. Understand this. The first thing that they did not do is never show us a model of how they would arm them. Understand this. although even though the CG came in and said that this is not a feasibility debate and this is like, we will make them assured that there will be feasibility, how do you actually want to show this? How do you actually want the distribution of these guns? How do you actually want to show the model of how it would work, and how would the guns, how would this model be actually better for this woman? This has never actually been shown in this case. There was no proper model structure in this case. The first thing that we tell to you is, the Prime Minister comes up and recognizes that there is patriarchal existence and there is patriarchal structures already in place within the society. That means that you are essentially tackling the security aspect of the entire debate, but at the same time, you do not go to the in-depth of the thing, which is the other aspects that patriarchy itself entails. There are other aspects too within the patriarchy. For example, the economic aspects, the societal aspects, and all the other aspects. Without changing all of this stuff, you directly jump the gun to buy a gun and actually empower the woman through security. How do you do that? That has never been shown. You never show how you change the patriarchal structures. Understand this. They try to show a model that where they actually want to show that there is some sort of structural change to security, but that again does not work. And why doesn't that work? They come up and say to us that there will be a sort of, there will be a sort of deterrence. So how does the armament better the life of women? So in case of the deterrence, they say that when you actually have armed yourself with a gun, what you essentially do is you create a deterrence within the perpetrators who would harm this woman. The thing is, people are already being armed in such ways, within like arming themselves with tasers, mace sprays and whatnot. But in the end of the day, these are not having that impact. The rape still goes on, sexual harassment still goes on. Go to New York, you will find that 3 out of 5 women are already armed. But what changes do you actually bring in this model? The change is nothing. The sexual harassment and all of those stuff still goes on. But yes, because of the already existing laws and because of the other existing stuff, you do get some changes and you do bring, no ma'am, you do bring some sort of, you do have a little bit of more leniency for women to have that justice system working for them, which you do not have in developing nations such as Bangladesh. So yes, enforcement of laws would be something that would work, but in their case, they actually go to this and say that like deterrence would be created. Moreover, they talk about empowerment. Understand this. Those who buy, there's this class difference that my first speaker talked about. Understand this, the class difference exists. When you're talking about empowering women, which woman are you talking about? It does not matter if you're white or black. What matters is how you're buying this gun. Again, this comes up to the question. When you go to the rural areas, will those women within the villages, will they be able to buy those guns? Because understand this, they don't even have the money enough to buy rice. So how do you expect them to be influenced within this context itself? Moreover, understand this, the opening also comes up and says that by only a marginal amount of people, if they carry a gun, it will change the whole scenario, that not everyone needs to carry a gun. Again, the question again goes to that aspect of itself, that this already exists. There is legal systems where you can buy gun too, but that does not change the scenario. The status quo still remains as it is. So it does not have any marginal change. Moreover, the DPM creates a more like agency, like women. They compare women with police and how the woman would be more confident by carrying guns and other stuff. Understand this, carrying guns does not only, this can go two ways. This can have that impact in both ways. You might create empowerment within the woman itself, but at the same time, you create a psychological trauma within the woman itself too. When you create gun, a sense of responsibility is also entailed within yourself, because you think that when you have the gun, you have the responsibility to use the gun. How are you actually going to train this woman to use that gun at a moment? You don't know how these weapons will be used. So as a result of this is going both ways, and as a result, you're not actually bringing any change at all. So this again goes to the same fact that you're not doing anything better for this woman by introducing this model. Yes, ma'am.
Sir, all of the flaws you point out are technical difficulties, which means they do agree with us in principle that it's okay to arm women if we can do so.
It's not technical difficulties that it's okay to arm women if you do so. The question is, when you're arming women, what changes are you actually bringing in? It's the status quo that you have stated in your debate, nothing new. Now the closing government, what they actually say, look, they said that there are bureaucratic impediments. This is again a reply to the POA and also the case that they have said. Bureaucratic impediments and lack of reinforcement don't help women. Understand this, the bureaucratic impediments and lack of reinforcements also would exist within their model of itself. when you actually arm yourself, understand this, you're giving the power to kill someone. So when you have the power to kill someone, there is also bureaucratic impediments within itself. When would this woman use this gun? There is a lot of things that they should have nuance within their case. How this gun would be used and what harms this gun, using this guns would entail. Understand this, there is a lot of bureaucratic impediments within your case too. In our case, the solution is to reinforce this stuff, to reinforce this bureaucratic impediments, because there is a just system of society where whether you're a man, whether you're a woman, there will be equal system of justice for all. Moreover, understand this, they come up and bring up the essence of liberation war and how the war crimes. Understand this, you're talking that you will be sacrificing a minority for the better good, but how do you provide the retribution for the minority? Do you not consider this minority as human beings too? This is something that they do not answer in their own sense. So this again, in the end of the day, what does this essentially does is empower stereotypes that women are violent. This does not change the scenario. And even if you do provide some sort of incentive for women within the context of the Western world or people who can afford for this model, it does not change anything. Now, moving on to our case, what did we say? We said that the power is actually creating a corruption within itself. It's creating a model where you're creating an imbalance and producing the society. Understand this, the class system that we have defined, that this is the class system that there is, and because of the class system, not everyone is having the access to it. Moreover, understand this, you're not giving the sense of power to everyone. There's a sense of segregation too, and as a result, you're creating a friction to the society too. And there is also the question of microaggressions, where you see that stereotypes are being empowered and you see more violence to it. And as a result of this, we think that closing takes the debate home. Thank you.
Did you enjoy it?